All right, so our speaker tonight is Dr. Kevin Ringelman. He's a new assistant professor at UC Davis in the Wildlife Fishing Conservation Biology Department, replacing probably a lot of you have known John Eady, our long-term duck professor on campus. He is his successor, and incidentally also a student.
Yeah, former grad student of John's.
And so he's got a lot of amazing, innovative ways of researching waterfowl ecology that he can tell us about tonight. And yeah, enjoy.
Great. Well, thanks so much for the invitation. I will try to keep my voice high to overcome the boisterous youth in the back. That's great. Yeah, so I did my PhD here at Davis 2007 to 2013. And then I taught at Louisiana State University for 10 years. And then am totally stoked to be back here and spend the rest of my career in Davis. So still getting into the birding community, and so it's a great pleasure to be here today. I don't have much of a preamble. Today, I just want to cover some of the projects that I and my graduate students have been working on sort of around the country, and make the case that there's just so much that we can learn from ducks, and they can really drive a lot of innovation. I'll turn this off here. A lot of the legacy of waterfowl in North America is historical. So John James Audubon, right? Some of his favorite subjects to paint were ducks. And the reasons are obvious, same as they are to you as birders. They're highly visible, they're gregarious. There's a huge diversity in North America. A third of the world's waterfowl species can be found here. And they do amazing behaviors. And so they're glorious birds to observe, to paint. But when he was doing his work, right, it was during a period when waterfowl were in decline. They were being dramatically over-harvested during the market hunting days of the late 1800s and into the early 1900s. You know, big gunners with these punt guns would traverse the Delaware and Chesapeake Bays and San Francisco Bays at night, gunning down hundreds or thousands of ducks at a time. And so this is from a boat in Louisiana. Some 400 ducks in this picture might range in price from 15 cents for a teal to $6 for a prime canvasback. And so, you know, making $2,500 for a morning's work in today's money was not a bad gig, right? And so economics really drove these species into decline. And it's difficult to overemphasize like how embedded they were in American culture. So if you ever want to go down a fun internet rabbit hole, historic menus is the way to go. This is, it's faded out on the screen, but this is a menu from when Theodore Roosevelt was hosting Prince Henry of Prussia in 1902. And the main course was canvasback duck, right? So ducks were embedded in American culture. And it was the meal that you would get at the Waldorf Astoria or the fanciest restaurants in Chicago, San Francisco, Boston, or New York.
Kevin, why were they so special? They tasted good?
They tasted delicious. Yeah, canvasbacks were the king of ducks and remain so to today. They're delicious because they eat a lot of wild celery as opposed to something like merganser, which eats fish and crayfish and stuff, and they taste terrible. And so the declines in market hunting really led a lot of the sportsmen of the day, the rich duck hunters of New York and Pennsylvania, towards conservation measures. And so we went from, you know, market hunting and the excesses there through like the Lacey Act and then the Migratory Bird Treaty Act, which effectively ended market hunting. And I label this as an innovation in conservation because it really was as at the time. The Constitution has no enumerated authorities for the federal government to legislate anything about migratory birds, right? That's preposterous. And those rights not enumerated in the Constitution are reserved to the states. So the way that Congress got around this, the innovation that they pursued was through a treaty. Article 2, Section 2 says that the president and 2/3 of the Senate can make a treaty. And so the United States made a treaty with Great Britain on behalf of Canada to protect migratory birds, which was upheld in the Supreme Court by Oliver Wendell Holmes and his colleagues. And that effectively ended market hunting. And really paved the way for the modern conservation of birds in North America. And concomitant with that, in the 1930s, after World War I, we invented things like the duck stamp, which is a federal license requirement to hunt ducks. And this was pretty revolutionary at the time. I mean, in 1934, when this was passed, $1 could feed a family of four for a week during the Dust Bowl. And so to think that the federal government would impose a tax on a big flying block of protein was pretty revolutionary at the time. And so now, the duck stamp costs $25 a year. And over the last, whatever it is, 90 years, 80 years, it's raised $900 million for wetlands and waterfowl conservation. A few years later, we passed a second conservation funding bill, the Pittman-Robertson Act, which shifted an existing excise tax on firearms and ammunition out of the general fund directly to the Secretary of the Interior to go back to habitat conservation, largely in support of waterfowl. And so to this day, hunters remain a major engine of generating this revenue to support conservation. And we're talking like $12 billion, mostly to habitat, which forms, a big part of the backbone of the National Wildlife Refuge System as it exists today. And so as we got all this money for habitat, it's like, well, where do we put it? Where do the birds need it? Well, understanding the migration ecology of these birds was very much in its infancy. And so we have pioneers like Lincoln, Frederick Lincoln, who sort of formalized bird banding through the USGS. Sort of the data that came from that established these migratory flyways that we know so well today, and really was able to pinpoint areas across North America that were important for the conservation of wild birds. Again, specifically waterfowl. As the science matured, after World War II, we've got a big glut of pilots that know how to fly and not a lot to do anymore, right? And so we designed, in support of waterfowl science, this breeding population survey. So every May, pilot biologists get in airplanes and they fly 2 million square miles of land in the United States and Canada, and they count every single duck and every single body of water larger than the queen-size mattress. And they've been doing it that way for 70 years. It's the longest running vertebrate survey in the world. And it's not even close, right? And so we get these amazing time series of data of duck populations that track patterns of drought, right? That can affect a variety of avian species. And so it was really sort of like this level of science that drew me personally to waterfowl as a study system. And in the 1980s, when the prairies were in drought, there was a lot of panic in the waterfowl community. And so we developed the North American Waterfowl Conservation Plan, the North American Waterfowl Management Plan, which set forth some strategic objectives for how many ducks we wanted to have and the habitat that needed to support them. And Congress, a few years later, passed a funding act that provides $1 million grants, now they're $3 million, to do wetland restoration. And so this model is now the paradigm that other bird conservation groups use. So Partners in Flight, Shorebirds, all of their conservation plans are modeled on this framework that we created for ducks in the 1980s. And the results of planning, science, funding have resulted in, I would say, some pretty amazing successes. Most of the birds in North America, right from the 3 billion birds report from Cornell, are in decline, except for waterfowl. Geese and swans are way up, mostly driven by a superabundance of snow geese. Dabbling ducks are up, and then water birds, piggybacking on the wetland conservation that's been done for waterfowl, are also up. So certainly a conservation success story that's the envy the world over, to be honest. And so that's where I sort of stepped into this world, was with this pantheon of scientists before me, and the conservation and science that they had put forth. And so where my interests really lie is in basic avian ecology, doing understanding the biology and ecology of these birds, and the intersection with applied questions of conservation and management. And certainly, in the last 5 years, I've really been trying to use some of the new technologies that are available to us to address questions that have heretofore just been impossible to answer, just by driving around and looking through binoculars and stuff. And so to start off sort of my portion of this talk, let's start with something familiar. The humble wood duck. And in this group, right, it's not, have you seen a wood duck ever? It's, have you seen a wood duck today? Because they're all over the Arboretum. And truth be told, this was a picture of John Eady as the familiar. I didn't know if anybody knew John, so I took that out. But the wood duck is one of the best studied birds in North America. The cavity nesting species, I have been professionally hassling wood ducks since graduate school. This is me in 2008, leading the wood duck internship program that the UC Davis undergrads are fortunate enough to have an opportunity to pursue. And that passion continues to this day. So this is me some 12 years later with some LSU undergrads, continuing to professionally hassle wood ducks. And as a study species, like we've been studying them for many decades, right? And so is there really anything left to learn about these? So this was one project that I took on at LSU where the state management agency, Louisiana Department of Wildlife and Fisheries, were interested in whether the boxes that they put up and maintain are they self-sustaining? Are they producing enough ducks that they're worth it? Or is it just like some sort of ecological trap for these birds? And so they got boxes all over the state of Louisiana, right? The cool part for me, and why I signed on for this project was the fact that we now have black-bellied whistling ducks in that state. They used to be relatively uncommon, and now they are everywhere. Ridiculously cool species, more closely related to swans than they are to other ducks. Sexes are monomorphic, both sexes incubate, like wildly weird stuff for a duck. And so that's what that got me excited for this. And historically, not super common at all. Like the range extends through Mexico into South America, all the way down south through Argentina. Their populations, were through South Texas, maybe touching Louisiana. They got knocked way back in the 70s with pesticides, DDT, aldrin, dieldrin, all that. But, they started making a comeback. And then right around the early 2000s, man, their populations really started blowing up for reasons that we still don't have a good grasp on. And now we've got breeding populations as far north as Memphis. And we've got prospecting individuals in Nebraska and Ontario. So this is a species that is, for better or worse, invading the range of our native wood duck. And so my question was, are these birds competing for nest sites? Like, what are their effects on each other, in this box nesting population? But wait, there are in fact 3 species there. So in addition to wood ducks and whistling ducks, we also have hood and mergansers. So they are the early, of course, pointer's not going to work. They are earlier nesting species. Wood ducks are in the middle, second bump for later nesting species. And then whistling ducks towards the end of the season in May and June and things like that. And they co-parasitize each other like crazy. So more than a quarter of merganser nests have wood duck eggs in them. 10% of wood duck nests have merganser eggs in them. 10% of wood duck nests have whistling ducks eggs in them, and 22% of whistling ducks have wood duck eggs in them. And yes, we have seen nests with all 3 species of egg in them at the same time, which did not hatch, which was too bad because that probably would have been a paper in itself. But you walk up on these boxes and there's crazy numbers of eggs in there. Like we've documented egg counts in the 60s, in the 70s. We've had whistling ducks hatch out 43 eggs. And like, folks, you walk up on a box and you open up and there's 43 ducklings in there. Like, they're super cute and all, but like, if your job is to tag them, it quickly becomes work, right? Especially in South Louisiana and humidity. So yeah, you get these cute little fluff balls, lots of mixed clutches. Here you got wood ducks on the left, whistling ducks on the right, cool markings on the face, all that. We've also got predators. This is a big predator of ducklings. This is about a 6-foot alligator at the base of a box. They're more of a threat to the technicians that need to go out and check boxes. It's a little bit difficult to convince sort of your technicians to go and check a box when there's alligators there. But we have snakes and stuff like that too. This is a rat snake that's got a bunch of eggs in it, right? That Tatum pulled out of the box. And we've got a situation in South Louisiana where we've got eggs being added by like all these various species. And then there's like weirdly eggs disappearing, which we didn't totally understand, like because we're numbering all the eggs. And so what we ended up doing is installing these trail cameras that we modified with a fisheye lens, just like super glued that sucker on there to get like a bird's eye view or aerial and in-box view of the ducks as they're coming and going. Try to figure out what's going on with these eggs, right? And what we found was wildly unexpected. This would be a red-bellied woodpecker eating eggs, which has only been documented once. So the wood duck hen comes back, removes the egg that's been pecked open. It looks like egg number 18. And then while she is removing the egg, the woodpecker comes back and pecks another one open. And so these woodpeckers just keep coming back and they will keep eating eggs. And if the hen is not there, like during the laying stage, they'll just come back and repeatedly feed on these eggs. I mean, it's just there, it's a source of protein, right? And so without this tech, like we would have never understood what was going on with these boxes. Like you just feel bad for these wood ducks, right? They are just trying to do their best here. So that is why all of these eggs kept disappearing from these wood duck boxes, while other eggs are being added at some rate by parasites. And so we get these super full nest boxes where there's whatever, 20, 30, 40, 50 eggs in them. And the traditional thinking is like parasitism has some sort of cost. So you get so many eggs in a box, they can't be incubated correctly, like hatch success goes down, or the female just gives up and abandons the nest, right? So the traditional thinking is at some level, parasitism must be bad. Too many eggs must be bad. We didn't find that. This is the typical clutch size of a wood duck is like 12, 13 eggs. So most of our clutches are larger than that. And survival of these nests increases the more eggs that we observe in there. This would be the maximum observed clutch size. We just like clutch size is not static in these boxes because eggs are coming and going all the time. And so what we think is going on and what my grad student Dylan just demonstrated with some math that I'm not showing the cartoon version is that in a scenario where there is only nest parasitism, you get this super abundance of eggs and eventually the hen abandons it, right? Just too much to take care of. Then you see this with dump nesting wood ducks more or less all the time, especially in highly visible boxes. If you only had woodpeckers, well, the natural clutch size of 12 to 15 eggs would be depleted through time, right? And the hen would eventually give up, or there'd be no eggs left. The nest would also be abandoned. And so what we have in Louisiana is this totally wild combination where eggs are being added by parasites and eggs are being taken away by predators, where somehow it like balances out to a clutch that can be incubated and we get successful nests out of this whole thing. And so it's a really unique study system where we've got this rapidly expanding whistling duck that is somehow buffering the costs of predation by this novel predator, the red-bellied woodpecker, to our native species, the wood duck, which is not the scenario I thought I was going to get into when I started this project in Louisiana. So pretty cool finding there. Anecdotally, these woodpeckers also appear to have egg preferences. How do we know? Because we can watch them on the trail cameras. They'll peck an egg and they'll not break through and they'll go and they'll choose a different egg. And so there is potentially cost to parasites, right? If these woodpeckers have a preference. And so a wood duck hosting their own nests has got a survival commensurate with any hooded merganser eggs that are laid parasitically. Same survival rate per egg. And yeah, as clutch size gets larger, maybe hooded mergansers do a little bit worse, but ballpark, they're like pretty much the same, right? The difference is in hooded merganser nests that have their own eggs, their own hosted eggs, survive just fine. Wood duck eggs laid parasitically into hooded merganser nests die at dramatic rates. That is clearly a lower survival rate. Potential reasons why. Hooded merganser eggs are about 5 times stronger than wood duck eggs. Okay, I don't totally buy that because it's a woodpecker, right? It could probably peck through any egg at once. So I don't know if that's it. Maybe they taste bad. Hooded mergansers don't taste good to hunters. Maybe they taste fishy. This is a mystery, right? One of those unsolved questions. But the ecology is clear, right? If you're a wood duck that is going to lay a parasitic egg, whether you choose to lay in the nest of another wood duck, your egg survives. If you choose to lay that egg parasitically in a merganser nest, your egg has got a very high probability of dying from woodpecker predation or whatever. The other thing we think is going on is from these trail cameras, mergansers are not gentle parents. They like get into these boxes and they jostle all the eggs around. And so it would not surprise me if the eggshell strength difference manifests there, where wood duck eggs just get cracked and broken a lot easier than merganser eggs. So that seems like a plausible explanation to me. So back to whistling ducks. They're a problem. So they are devastating to rice fields. So they come back to Louisiana. They seem to show up, in the rice fields in like right around this time of year, sort of mid-February, March, and they're eating all of those new shoots in the rice fields. And they are causing millions of dollars of damage to rice farmers, and they are not popular. And so they also in the winter hang out at these grain elevators and they'll die and contaminate stuff and they poop all over everything and they're just loud and annoying. And then this is next to the Capitol building in Baton Rouge and there's 10,000 of these whistling ducks there. So they are a nuisance, just like Canada geese are in the Northeast. There's just too many of them in urban areas and we don't want them there. So much so that the literal governor of Louisiana put out a hit on these whistling ducks, saying that we believe that increased harvest should happen. We want to open a special hunting season for them in September to run concurrent with the early teal hunting season to try to reduce their numbers, sort of in response to complaints from the rice ag lobby and some of these public health concerns and so on and so forth. The issue, right, is we don't want to be shooting, say, whistling ducks that are then migrating south to Mexico or Panama or wherever they're going, right? We need to be responsible in crafting these harvest regulations. And so this is the native range of the whistling duck. So they could be going anywhere from Louisiana to parts further south. We have no idea. And so we started this project where we use geolocators. Y'all are probably familiar with these. These are just light detecting sensors that use the midpoint between dawn and dusk to estimate longitude and day length to estimate latitude. They're only accurate to like a couple hundred kilometers, but it's good enough to know whether you're in Baton Rouge or, Venezuela, right? They're way less obtrusive than backpacks. Cavity nesters don't do well with backtrack transmitters because they can't get in and out of the cavity. They bonk and they break the transmitter or can't breed or whatever. So these are a good solution. Our ducks don't move. These are the tracks of all the whistling ducks for which we had recovered geolocators, and they're in Louisiana. That circle represents sort of the error ellipse around each of these points. And so, I don't know, maybe some of them are going to North Louisiana or bopping around in Arkansas a little bit, but they are definitely not going to the Yucatan. They are definitely not going to Colombia, right? This is a resident species in Louisiana, a resident breeder, and they are resident year round. So cleared that mystery up. But then when we look at the raw light levels, so you can see, so the dark is nighttime and the light colors is daytime. And you can see that, there's patterns where the geo is shaded and things like that. This is summer. You can see that the day length is longer, night is shorter. But like, what's up with all this fuzzy stuff in the middle? That's light in the middle of the night, but only in some parts of the year. And so it doesn't mean that these birds, they may not be migrating, but it doesn't mean they're not moving. So evidently they're moving from somewhere where it's reliably dark at night to somewhere where it's evidently not dark all night, which is wild. And it's concentrated, this artificial light at night is during the non-breeding season. So this is breeding season. All these pips of light are during the non-breeding season. And well, gosh darn it, you layer on the hunting seasons. When people start shooting, they move. They go out of the rural areas and they go into somewhere that's light polluted, like an urban area or a grain elevator. Same with the regular duck season. They don't like to get shot at. And so they move out of the marsh. They move out of those rural areas and they hunker down in City Park in New Orleans, Capitol Lakes in Baton Rouge. They go to the grain elevators all up and down the Mississippi River. And so they're nomadic, right? But predictably so, based on whether people are shooting at them. And so coming back to this request, it looks like it's going to happen. So as of January 6, 2026, the commission has approved a special whistling duck season to run concurrent with that September teal season. So we don't know what the ducks are going to do. My bet is that they're going to go to the grain elevators again. They're just going to go sooner. And so I don't know that they're going to totally solve this problem. But there are plans with some of my colleagues still in Louisiana to put some transmitters on and kind of track them as this season takes place. So super enigmatic bird. I could spend many hours talking about all the things that we don't know about them. One more teaser before I move on, because it kind of leads into the next thing. We see all these mixed clutches of eggs, wood ducks and whistling ducks, whatever it was, 20% of nests, 30% if you include both species. I have never, ever seen a mixed brood on the water. Where do they go? Like, do they reassort? I've seen whistling duck parents trying to drown wood duck ducklings from a different, like from a wood duck parent, like with their big rosy feet, like trying to hold the ducklings under the water, which is not kind. I don't think they do that to ducks that hatch from their own box, but like we literally don't know, right? We have no idea what's going on with these birds post-hatch. So still major areas of research yet to be explored. And so that leads me into ways that we might tackle some of the other aspects of waterfowl life history. We focus on nests here. We're going to shift to broods. So a duckling is one of the easiest, most snackable things on a wetland landscape in May through July, right? Herons get them, turtles get them, fish get them, ravens get them, hawks get them, everything eats a duckling, right? And so they've got quite a survival gamut to try to run. And we believe that it's probably a big bottleneck in waterfowl demography, but we just don't know. Like we've always focused on nest survival. But the reality is like, if 90% of the nest hatch, great, but if brood survival is 10%, nest survival doesn't matter. So we have to get a handle on post-hatch survival. The problem is these things are hard to see. They're in a wetland with cattails and emergent vegetation. And so you go looking around for these with binoculars, and how many are you actually going to see, right? These are data from 1980, not this Ringelman. These would be from my dad, who's also a duck biologist. This is Kevin Ringelman minus 5 years. But so he went out on a bucket, right? And just stood there or sat there in a wetland for 12, 14 hours and watched for broods. And they are mostly not visible, right? So imagine sitting on a bucket for 14 hours and for 60% of the time, the brood, you cannot see it. So since the 1950s, we've ignored brood ecology because we just can't study it reliably. There's no way to do this. And so that is where we can really apply some of the new tech that's available. And so for the last 5 years, more than that, more like 8 years, we've been flying uncrewed aerial vehicles equipped with thermal and regular vision cameras to study breeding waterfowl ecology. Most of this work has taken place in southern Canada. So this is the first generation thermal camera that we use. We're about 100 feet high right now, and we're dropping down in elevation, and you can see these little hot spots moving around. This one is a fence post. Here we've got mama duck and a bunch of ducklings. And they're lit up like Christmas lights. They're clearly in vegetation. You would have no chance of seeing this from the side of the wetland, right? But here we can clearly see the hen and her ducklings, and there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, there's 10 of them. So we can count them. And so, gosh, this kind of looks like it has potential to really change how we study post-hatch ecology. Fast forward now to the current drones that we fly. This is from 200 feet in the air. We can zoom in with a thermal camera. And at this point, it's just not even fair how closely we can see these birds. And so this is a blue-winged teal mama with her ducklings. And I don't think I have to make much of a case for you that that brood would not be seen from the side of the wetland, right? It's choked in all this emergent vegetation and totally impossible. And so you really do need the thermal, because even in a regular color image, and I have friends across the pond in Finland who've tried this without the thermal, and you just You can't see them. You would never know that there were 3 broods here, right? And so we've done the comparisons. We've sent out ground teams and we've flown drones, and we see twice as many. Twice as many. So whatever we thought about how many ducklings were being produced, we were off by a factor of 2, which is bad. Um, and so that was like a pretty cool, finding, and we were very excited about this. And then, we did the math about detection probability, because the way that you do these surveys is you go out in the morning and you go out in the afternoon, and then you can do some math to say, oh, well, I saw it in the morning, but not in the afternoon, and kind of figure out your detection probability. It's not great still. It's only at 0.55, right? And so that bothered me for years and years. And so my current grad student, we're finally addressing that. We are now explicitly marking individual ducks to follow them. So when we see them in the afternoon, we know it's exactly the same duck and her ducklings that we saw that morning. So we're focused on blue-winged teal for this component. She's marked with a alphanumeric nasal saddle that falls off after about a month, and a little prong and suture VHF radio transmitter that also falls off after about maybe 8 to 10 weeks. And we know they fall off because we've recaptured these hens and they're fine. And for a far cry from my PhD, me standing on the hood of my Oldsmobile Alero with a Yagi, praying to hear a bird in the marsh, right? We can now fly drones for that too. So we've got a drone on which we have equipped a VHF antenna and a base station receiver, wherein in real time, we can fly over these wetlands in the prairies and detect whether our bird is there or not. So no more traipsing across the landscape, hoping to hear the beeps, right? Grant sits in his air-conditioned Dodge Ram watching the TV screen and flies his drone, right? A far cry from my dad sitting on a bucket with binoculars for 14 hours. And so we get these signal strengths, right, where it could be on either of these 2 wetlands. We can simply filter by signal strength and figure out where the signal was strongest, hot and cold, basically. Looks like she's in that corner of that wetland. So then we pop up the thermal drone, make sure she is who we think she is. Switch over to thermal or switch over to visual, zoom in. And that is blue-winged teal. Her marker designation by the nasal saddle is -E. You can kind of see the E on there. And you can see the whip antenna from the radio on her back. And she couldn't care less that we're flying over the top of her. Her ducklings are foraging, doing what ducklings do. So we can count these ducks. We could observe their behavior. We could track foraging. All sorts of cool science that we could do with some of these things. You can see the band on her foot. And so what we've found is that, in fact, some of these ducks can hide from the thermal camera. We find about 70% with the thermal, and of course we find 98% with the radio because it's beeping. Like we eventually find them. But even when we hear the beeps and we go out and look for them in the thermal, sometimes we miss them. And that's all very important information to know as we try to scale up what we do with these brood estimates. And so recall these transects that are flown for putative breeding pairs. They follow up those transects with these black, dark sort of segments where ground observers go in and they make sure that the aircraft is seeing what they think they see. So they're ground truth segments where they're counting duck pairs. Well, if we were to go in 3 months later and fly drones for broods, now we've got number of pairs on the landscape, which is like your potential productivity, number of broods, which is your realized productivity of that landscape relative to habitat, agriculture, whatever, is going on. And so potentially a really fast and cost-effective metric to track duck productivity, like at scale, like at scales of provinces, of continents, right? If we could scale this. So that's sort of where we're going with a lot of this brood work. But in addition, we're getting all of this unique information on brood and duckling survival. This is -E again, but her ducklings are now 2 weeks older. I forget if she still has all 11 or not. I think she might have lost a couple. But we're now finally able to track this and be able to view these birds as they progress through development and eventually fledge some, 30 to 40 days later. The movements between wetlands, so we can track who's going where, how many ducklings they have when they do it, how many wetlands they move, how far they go. Are they passing by wetlands in favor of a different wetland? Why? Is it something about the vegetation? Is it something about the invertebrate community? So just by being able to study these ducks in new ways, we open up new ecological questions about what habitat and what resources they may need and how we might better manage them. Just along the way, it turns out that if you get a whole bunch of drone footage, it's a huge hassle to try to process all that. So we've developed some AI tools that will now allow us to automatically speciate ducks from drone footage. This is still a work in progress. It works pretty well for drakes. It works not so well for hens. Again, it's just a training data set thing. And so we're working with a company they're partly out of Silicon Valley and partly out of Missouri that is working with us on some of this AI stuff. So, the future is now, right? And so concurrent with Grant's Blue-winged Teal project, my grad student Rich is doing a similar project on canvasbacks, so marking them with nasal saddles. And canvasbacks, right, are a duck that is very different in a variety of respects. So it's a diving duck. It's super philopatric to where it breeds. It doesn't nest in the grass. It builds its nest out of reeds that it collects and builds a platform over water. And they are subject to rampant parasitism, especially by redheads. You can see, it's kind of washed out for you guys, but there's a couple redhead eggs here and some canvasback eggs up here, a little bit different shade. And so similar type of study, similar questions, but different life histories. And so especially we're gaining a lot of pretty interesting insights into parasitism. This is actually intraspecific parasitism. So this is a canvasback hen that is trying as hard as she can to lay an egg parasitically underneath another canvasback. We've seen redheads do this when canvasbacks are on incubation break. They'll roll the eggs out of the nest and lay their own. We've seen hens fighting and jostling. This is like a pretty amicable interaction, to be honest, which then leads to other questions like, do these hens know each other? They're so philopatric that they're probably, were nesting on the same wetland in last year. Are they sisters? I don't know, right? But a bunch of cool questions sort of open up when we can see the behavior of these birds in a detail that we weren't able to before. And then finally, some serious David Attenborough stuff here. Look at predation. So this is a coyote that Rich found when he was doing nest checks. He was actually looking for a brood that had just hatched out. And this coyote is in this wetland and it found the canvasback nest bowl, which is empty, sniffing around. Rich backs up, switches to thermal. And over on the other side of the wetland is a canvasback and her ducklings, like hunkered down, trying to stay exceedingly still as this coyote is searching around for where the snacks might be. And so we've documented similar behavior in raccoons. In the uplands, we've seen badgers and skunks and foxes. And most of those predators are active at night, right? And so the fact that you have a thermal camera that doesn't care whether it's day or night can track some of these nocturnal predators of ducks in ways that we weren't able to before. Eventually, the coyote loses. And this, I forget the actual fate of this brood, but she was not killed by this coyote. She was found on a different wetland a couple weeks later. And I think she fledged, but maybe not. It's a gamut out there. And so waterfowl have really been, they've been a model system in ecology and conservation for a long, long time, right? Going all the way back to the 19 teens and establishment of sort of like the modern North American model of wildlife conservation. And it's certainly historically, and I would argue even currently, where we have opportunity to scale avian science up to communities and up to continents to really try to do grassland wetland conservation in a science-based way at a scale that's relevant for managing the demography of these species. Certainly, it's been a flagship for science-based management of birds and their habitat. I mean, look at all these water birds, let alone snakes and amphibians and other species that rely on wetlands that have come along with the coattails of ducks. And so waterfowl have this legacy as a game species that imbues them with a lot of funding, a lot of agencies, a lot of resources that are not available to some of the other avian species. And so, part of how I see my job is trying to establish some of how these technologies can be used, like drones, for example, to do duck science, but that could easily be applied to grassland nesting songbirds. I've got a friend at Iowa State that's applying it to pheasants, right? We can do surveys for sage grouse or turkeys or what have you. And so a lot of these methods can be broadly extensible to other members of the avian community. So I try to leave plenty of time for questions. Thank you for having me.
Do you see much hybridism between those three species?
No, actually. So ducks hybridize more than any other order of birds in the world. But between those three, I'm not sure if there has been a hybrid documented because they're pretty different evolutionarily. So like wood ducks are perching ducks, and mergansers are more closely related to sea ducks, and then whistling ducks are more closely related to swans. And so there's enough evolutionary differentiation that it's not as common as like mallards and black ducks or mallards and Hawaiian ducks or even like mallards and wood ducks happens more often, mallards and gadwall. So it's not super common. No. Yeah, good question. Goodbye.
Do you have plans to do genetic studies about the nest, just for parentage?
For which species?
So there was a mixed, the two try to lay the eggs at the same nest.
Yeah, so
It should all be passive unless it's right.
Totally, yeah. And so I don't have the genetic data that we've collected so far. But that would certainly be like the next frontier, right? Is to not only understand whether those canvasbacks are parasitizing siblings or not, but just generally like the genetic structure of that population, as we think that they're more phylopatric than a lot of bird species. And so understanding sort of how individual pockets are related to each other in, say, like Manitoba versus South Dakota versus, parts of Alberta, because that's where a lot of the conservation strategies are implemented is on landscape scales. And so I think that would be a fruitful path for sure to pursue.
Basically, sort of similar to that question, do you have any sense for in the Louisiana wood duck nest box situation, how many of the eggs in those, they're relatively successful for how much they're being parasitized and predated, but how many of those eggs are actually the actual
I know, right?
one that's incubating? And then is that just going to obliterate fitness for birds that aren't parasites?
Totally, yeah. And so John Eady has done that work here in California and has found that there are wood duck nests where a hen is sitting on none of her own eggs, which is wild. It's everywhere in between, right? So they're all her own eggs. And so we don't know in Louisiana if it's similar or not. We do have blood on every female and on every duckling, so we could go there. If we have the money and the genetics, someone to run the analysis, we could do that. The more interesting question, I think, is whistling ducks, because wood ducks kind of go and do their own thing in the non-breeding season. Whistling ducks stay together as family groups. So when we see them in Capitol Lakes, in Baton Rouge, we can see mom and dad, and we can see the kids. They're all monomorphic, but you can tell that they're kids, right? Because they look younger, they're scruffy. And gosh, when they show up at the boxes in April, and they're just screwing around for a month before they breed, but it sure looks like they're still in family groups. And that would make sense because that's what geese do. And so all these whistling ducks that are showing up and their population is growing seemingly exponentially or close to it. is it just parents and their offspring? And what does that genetic structure look like? And what does that mean for parasitism, right? So maybe there's rampant inclusive fitness for these whistling ducks if all these sites are just like parents and their siblings and kids and grandkids and nieces and nephews and stuff, which seems far more likely in whistling ducks than in wood ducks. And that is a comparative study that definitely needs to get done. And we have blood on all of our whistling duck parents and all of our whistling duck babies. So we can do that if we have funding and time. So that's totally where I want to take it. Yes.
So this is all first off amazing, really great job. Really fun stuff. With the whistling duck situation, you brought up earlier how there were some records historically of them. I'm just curious about it because you also talked about with red-throated woodpeckers. Do you think that all was historically there perhaps before things like the era of destruction happened, or is it all like what you're saying, possibly still just very novel, this community ecology situation?
Yeah, that's a really tricky. It's a good question and one that's hard to answer. So the only reference that we could find of Melanerpes woodpeckers preying on eggs of any kind was like a note in some regional journal in New York from the 90s or 80s or something. And so, but we've seen it in Louisiana, and then we talked to our colleagues in Mississippi and loaned them some of our trail cameras, and they see it. And then we started talking to folks in South Carolina, and all of a sudden they're seeing it too. But we've got multiple subsites in Louisiana, right? And we only see woodpecker predation at two of our sites. And so it seems to me, or my best guess is it's like a culturally transmitted phenomenon where like woodpeckers in a given area learn that there's a bunch of protein in those boxes that they can go get. And it seems to be like hyper concentrated. Like you can drive 20 minutes down the road and not a single nest in 5 years has ever had a woodpecker eat an egg, right? Whereas we get entire nest boxes wiped out. It's 4 or 5 eggs a day by woodpeckers. And so it's very spotty, which is super weird because we have woodpeckers everywhere and we have wood ducks everywhere and they coexist in forests, right? This is not a novel evolutionary pairing by any means, but it does seem to be a behavior that has not been well documented before now.
How long do the ducklings stay in the nest for cavity nesters? So how long does it take before the drones could see them? Because they can't see them in the cavities, right?
One day.
Oh, 1 day.
1 day. So they hatch out typically in the morning, or midday, somewhere mid-morning, midday, and then they hang out for about 24 hours. And they come out wet and they can't really move, right? They're getting their motor skills. And so that 24-hour period, they get fluffy, they get dry, they get active, they imprint on mom's vocalizations, and then they jump. And so within 24 hours, basically every dabbling duck or perching duck, wood ducks, blue-winged teal, canvasbacks, they all leave within 24 hours. So that means that you really got to get on them with the drone because they might travel to a different wetland, right away when they hatch. And we've seen that. So she may not take her ducklings swimming around in the wetland she's at. She may go a mile and bypass 5 different wetlands to go to some place that she scouted to take her ducklings. And by scout, I know that they do this because we've got data from Sassoon, from some of the USGS folks that show hens will prospect areas for their ducklings and they will take their ducklings to the areas that they prospected. And so if you're going to fly a drone and try to find these things, especially if you don't have a radio on them, you need to be there at hatch date. You need to be there at hatch date to see if they move.
On top of drones, it's really cool like seeing all the work that's being done with it. It's like you said, helping break down layers of research that were otherwise not possible. How expensive are they? Because obviously with all that really cool, great software, like the fact you can zoom in and have thermal, I'm just curious how expensive that must be to get that stuff together and how much how many of you use? Like one drone, several?
Yeah, so one drone fully kitted out with all the extra batteries and all the charging and all the extra parts that break is 20,000, 25. So expensive, but relative. So would you rather have one drone that actually sees the ducklings or 6 technicians at $18,000 a field season that don't see the ducklings, right? So when you talk about, and we can survey the wetlands, I think the efficiency was like 4.5 times as fast, and we see twice as many ducklings. So it's a big capital expense up front, but the cost effectiveness is definitely on the size of the drones. In Canada, we're flying a fleet of, I think we've got 6 thermal drones and 2 VHF drones and some backups. So it's substantial. The Trump administration just passed a law banning all of DJI manufactured drones for new sale in the US, which is the drones that we're flying because they have the best cameras. And so our job got a little bit harder because now we have to buy American-made drones, which don't have the camera quality that the Chinese drones have. So it's what it is. I get why they're doing it. Like the Chinese drones have parts made by Huawei, and there's national security concerns. As far as I'm concerned, the Chinese government can look at the ducks all they want, but I get it. I get it. Yeah. Yeah.
Can have questions.
No questions in the chat yet.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Those, could you repeat them, especially to the questions from the back?
Oh, yeah.
Could you repeat them to the audience?
Yes.
Right, so, how much do you think that what you found in terms of like nest parasitism rates and also, like predation rates, how much do you think that's influenced by the sample size being entirely, surrounding birds that are using a man-made structure to nest in? Like how does that compare, or give us thought of how that compares to like
Yeah.
a more natural?
So the question from the audience was, how much of this parasitism and predation in these cavity nesting wood duck, whistling duck, hood and merganser populations is due to the fact that they're using artificial structures? Fantastic question. Those birds in natural cavities are hard to study because it's hard to find natural cavities. New advances in LiDAR mean that we are able to identify trees most likely to have cavities. And so what we're going to be doing this year at Birdhaven Ranch, just whatever it is, an hour and a half north of us in the Butte Sink, is we're going to be have some crews on the ground with a handheld thermal and flying drones with thermal to try to scope potential tree cavities to see if they're hot, right? So a hot tree cavity is being used. And so that could really increase our efficiency for trying to study these birds in natural cavities. Because otherwise, your only method is to mark hens before the season and then follow them to a cavity and like hope they don't go too far and hope you can hear the beeps inside the tree and like a bunch of logistic things that are a nightmare. So we're going to try some of that this year because it's a totally fair point. Like how much of this parasitism and predation is just totally contrived because these artificial boxes are super visible and obvious and clearly contain eggs and stuff. Don't know, but we're gonna try to find out. Just need an adventurous grad student to climb trees and check nests. They exist.
Do you expect or is it known whether the same levels of parasitism occur in other closely related groups of ducks? Like green-winged teal and cinnamon, or maybe bufflehead and goldeneye.
So yeah, so in the in wood ducks, we really don't have like a lot of close congeners here in North America. When we're talking about like mergansers, bufflehead, goldeneye, much more closely related, and they all are parasites. So they all nest in cavities, and yes, they definitely will parasitize each other. So this season, starting flying to Alaska on April 15th, we'll be starting a study of common goldeneye in nest boxes, and parasitism happens there. It's to a lesser extent than we observe either in wood ducks in California, Nevada in the South, but it does happen for sure.
When a woodpecker damages a wood duck egg and wood duck goes to get rid of it, how far do they take it and ends up eating that protein?
I don't know. Yeah, we don't know. I think that they probably just fly a little ways off and drop it in the nearest wetland. Similar to like for a precocial, or sorry, for an altricial bird, like the parents will pick up the fecal sacs of the kids and like go and drop it somewhere else, right, to get the feces out of the nest. I imagine it's like the same kind of behavior, just removing the trash. They don't drop it right at the base of the box. Like we don't see eggs floating or like on the ground or anything. And we'll probably, unless we observe a hen doing it, we'll never know because in the Louisiana swamp, that water is full of everything that will eat eggs instantly, right? Like Katie would go around and just be, the alligators really like marshmallows, if you didn't know that. So Katie would be rolling around on the side by side and like throwing marshmallows to get the alligators away from the nest box to go and check the nest box. And so I don't know what I don't know what an egg looks like hitting the water, but I bet it looks a lot like a marshmallow. So I would assume that those alligators are on top of it.
Oh. So the woodpeckers that are predating the eggs, are they really eating everything out of the egg? I mean, are they spending some time with it, or mainly just pecking and sipping it and going on?
The answer is closer to the first one, where they are definitely consuming the egg, because that's the other one of the hypotheses that we had considered was like, well, it's a cavity, and maybe they're like jealous that there's a cavity, and they're like trying to get rid of a cavity competitor or something. But they're eating those eggs. Like they will poke a hole and they will lap it up. And the video I showed is of the hen, removing the eggs pretty much right away. But during the laying stage, where the hen is there for she's there from like 8 to 10 a.m. and then she leaves, comes back the next day, is there from 8 to 10 a.m. Like the woodpecker will come in, peck an egg, and then will go do its woodpecker stuff and come back 2 hours later and eat more of the same egg, go and do some woodpecker stuff, come back and eat more of the egg. So it is a foraging resource for them, for sure.
We have one question in the chat from Ken. He says, not sure if you mentioned it, but is parasitism a function of available cavity numbers?
Yes. So the other way to phrase that question would be, are nest sites so limiting that they must parasitize because they can't find their own nest site? Maybe. Given if you think about like the deep history of wood ducks, when we had bottomland hardwood forests all over the Mississippi alluvial valley and throughout the Ohio River Valley, and there were limitless nest cavities. Maybe now we have fewer of them. I would believe that, right? And that's what artificial nest boxes are supposed to supplement. In the sites where we were in Louisiana, there were a lot of trees around there. And I find it pretty hard to believe that those ducks couldn't find someplace natural to nest if they wanted to. We also did not have 100% box use at any of our sites in any of our years. And should they wanted to, they could have used that box that was empty. And so we never had 100% box occupancy. So, I think that we don't have as many cavities as we had in deep history, but I think that that is not the sole cause of parasitism, is lack of cavities. I don't think that's true.
Mentioned the utility of the drones, especially the thermal cameras in other taxa. I'm sure it's quite happened, but I'm curious to know the stories. Have you observed like meadowlarks and other grassland species and they're probably smaller ducks that still work pretty easily for them if you have technology?
Yeah, so the drone works well for anything that moves. So it works very horribly for nests. Because a nest is just a hotspot, and in every rock, every tire, every anthill, every tin can, every piece of trash that's on the prairie looks like a nest. And we've flown the drone over known nests and not be able to see them because they're in too thick a cover. We've flown over lots of things that look like nests and they're not. And so for things that are not moving, drones suck. For things that are moving, they're really, really good. So birds that are flying, maybe if you flush like a grassland nesting bird from a nest, and then you've got a flushing signal and a hotspot that it's leaving, perfect. We can do that. And that's been done with some other researchers in the Dakotas into Iowa. Where I think there's a lot of utility would be in things like secretive marsh birds, so rails, right? The best way we have to survey rails is playback surveys and hope that they call back. And there's a bunch of assumptions and distance things and a bunch of statistical weirdness, and we just don't have we don't know that much about rails, right? But man, they show up on a thermal camera because they're zipping in and out of the reeds, right? And so that motion catches your eye, And it might be pretty hard to identify them to species. There's some size stuff, like a sora is not the same size as a clapper rail, Ridgway's whale now, I guess. But so I think there's possibility there. And we've seen rails zipping through the marsh. So it kind of depends on the species and the context, but it's got to be moving, is what I tell everybody. The other thing about drones is like you cannot fly transects. You cannot fly and just mow the lawn and take pictures and identify it later for anything. It doesn't work. Like the glare of the sun changes in ambient temperature. Like you have to pilot these things, stop, look, zoom, move on. It's still like a very manual process. You need a human in the loop doing the searching. I have friends and colleagues that tried to automate it, and imagine spending a whole field season flying drones over wetlands, and you put it up on the computer and you can only identify 4% of the things that are out there. That is a graduate career that is going in a different direction. So, thou shalt not fly transects.
Well, what do you think the evolutionary reason is for social parasitism? What are they getting out of?
I mean, so the classic way of thinking is like, if I don't have to take care of my ducklings, let's make somebody else do it, right? So that is most likely probably in hens that are in poor condition, or maybe the environment won't support a hen to get enough nutrients to lay a nest of her own. Maybe she can only obtain enough, body condition to put out 1 or 2 eggs, and so lay it in somebody else's nest and hope for the best kind of thing. Those are sort of the traditional explanations, and it kind of makes sense for why it's more common in waterfowl as a precocial species because there's very little cost to accepting an egg, right? These ducklings hatch and they feed themselves, and they might even dilute the predation risk of your own offspring. And some innovative studies out of Europe have shown that parasitic, I guess maybe they're goslings or ducklings, I don't remember which, but they're actually on the periphery of the brood itself, like as a selfish herd thing. So like those are the offspring that get killed by a harrier or a bass or whatever. This is in contrast to, like some of the like co-evolved African species, whittlebirds and weavers and things like that, or that have really aggressive arms races for eggs, parasitic eggs that look like host eggs, and parasitic chicks that have mouth markings that looks like host chicks, right? Where there's like a really big cost to the parent of having to feed that little pink blob of goo for like 20 days until it gets feathers, it can go be off on its own. So ducks, relatively speaking, like not a big deal to have an extra duckling in the mix.
And you were saying that the siblings stay in the center and the unrelated ones are around the heads.
That there's been some science that shows that. It hasn't been, I wouldn't say confirmed in sort of like a modern context, but I'll believe it.
Related to parasitism, it's probably just going to come off as a very dumb question because I mean, looking at some of the footage, it shows that the woodchuck hens they can actually identify if that egg is damaged taken out. Can they recognize what is a parasitic egg and what is their own egg by chance?
So I would say that, so can wood duck hens recognize parasitic eggs? I would say that they've got almost no chance of identifying a parasitic egg of another wood duck because there's some differences between hens, but they kind of all look the same, their eggs. A hen wood duck should definitely be able to identify a merganser egg because it's a round cue ball and it's bright white. They may lack the dexterity to remove it from a nest box. So they may know that it's there, but they may not be able to do anything about it. I mean, wood ducks are pretty smart. Like some of John Eady's research has demonstrated that like these hens can count. So when parasites are choosing a wood duck box in which to lay a parasitic egg, they will choose a nest that has fewer eggs in it because that is a nest that's at the laying stage. They put a fresh egg in, all the other eggs are fresh, everyone's developing at the same time, versus a nest that has a ton of eggs in it. The parasite thinks, hey, maybe these are already being incubated. My egg at day 0 is not going to catch up with these eggs at day 16, so I'm not going to lay there. So wood ducks are very good at like counting eggs and like making smart decisions like that. So do they have the cognition to recognize parasitic eggs? I would think so. but I don't think that they can manipulate them out of the box.
Just 'cause they're bigger, they're too big.
Yeah, or like if you're, like grabbing an egg, it just I haven't when they grab these eggs, they're like grabbing it like in the puncture wound, right? And kind of getting a grip on the shell. And could be, yeah, could be a variety of reasons. But like we certainly have never captured footage of a wood duck removing an egg that was whole of any kind. Over a lot of hours of undergrads watching video and fast forward.
This is gonna be a really broad question. I mean, the whole talk has been about actually really great examples all over North America looking at the success. Out of curiosity, what's the situation with waterfowl in other like countries or continents in terms of things like this amount of whether it's money or just attention given to their conservation? Is it similar to North America or not as similar?
Oh man. I went to the Pan-European Duck Symposium in Sweden in August, and I went in thinking that I knew about duck conservation, and I know about duck conservation in North America. In Europe, it's 1910 still. So there is no coordination among countries for surveys. There's no coordination for harvest. They have seasons for species, but they don't have bag limits for any of their birds. You can hunt over bait. You can hunt at night. You can hunt with lead in a lot of places, or they ban lead, but they don't enforce it. So like it is 19 teams over there and so we've actually so as an outcome of my presence there in a workshop that we put on trying to increase collaboration and crosstalk, we've got a paper in review that outlines a lot of the differences between North American waterfowl science and management and European science and management that was like really super enlightening for me to be over there. And like it's just they've got it and they've got it hard. Like they can't go where their ducks breed a lot of the time because they got the boreal forest in Scandinavia and they can check on their goldeneye and their tufted ducks and whatever. But like a lot of their pintail and widgeon are breeding in Russia. And you can't just go to Russia, right? And study ducks there. They are not on speaking terms with like a lot of Europe for obvious reasons. And so they can't fly the breeding population survey that we do in North America because their neighbor is not Canada. Where their ducks breed is Russia. And that's a big problem. And so they can do these wintering surveys and kind of get a handle on things, and they're doing the best they can. One thing I will say is that we as a majority culture in North America have sort of accepted ducks as a hunted species, and all that is part and parcel therein. Hunters pay for their conservation, there's licensing and bag limits and requirements, and it's tightly regulated. And in Europe, they view their wildlife as they're very protectionist, right? It's preservation. And so keeping things whole. And so they view sort of the harvest of ducks not as something that could benefit their conservation through taxes and fees and NGOs and all of these things, but like it is a loss to that population, right? In terms of demographics. And so their default is protect everything, unless otherwise. And so there's a real tension culturally, which translates into politically, that doesn't exist here in the US. That was very difficult for me to understand just spending a week there. So
it's more like a preservation attitude there versus here it's more of a conservation attitude.
Totally. Yep. And we have this wise use mandate that goes back to Roosevelt and Pinchot in the 1900s, right? And they've got this preservationist John Muir sort of set aside philosophy for a lot of these things. So really good question and totally eye-opening. Like, can we please just not shoot lead shot anymore? Like, don't expel known toxins into the environment for like dozens of reasons unrelated to birds. Like, it's just bad for humans, right? Yeah.
The interesting flip side is that they still have a lot of hunting capacities in Europe, and it varies from country to country. It's an enormous challenge that the UN has been trying to get them to work together, and so they're preserving their ducks at the same time they're harvesting thrushes in the Mediterranean.
Yeah, exactly. And then some of the birds go to Africa. And what do you do about birds that are wintering in Morocco? right? If you're in France and your birds are breeding in Russia, flying through France and wintering in Morocco, like what are you as France supposed to do about that? Like they've got it hard over there, and I get it. But a really interesting set of circumstances, and they pay a little bit more attention to their geese. Largely because they're agricultural pests, like in Denmark, when they're staging to go up to Greenland and places like that, and they're eating all the grassy shoots, same as whistling ducks. So they pay a little bit more attention to geese, but yeah, the duck thing is like the Wild West. I was astonished.
Time that we should let him relax.
Fantastic. Well, thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure.
Will you come back? This was fabulous.
Sure.